Somewhere in Beijing, there is a room where very serious people have decided that the South China Sea belongs to China. All of it. The 9-dash line, a cartographic claim so ambitious, it makes the old British Empire look modest, encompasses roughly 90% of one of the busiest waterways on Earth, overlaps the exclusive economic zones of 6 sovereign nations, and was ruled illegal by an international tribunal in 2016, in a decision that Beijing has chosen to address by printing new maps with the line still on them. The maps are very nice. The international law is very clear. These two facts have existed in productive tension for years. Into this tension, on a Tuesday morning in the South China Sea, USS Benfold, DDG-65, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, is conducting a freedom of navigation operation approximately 11 nautical miles from a reef that China claims, that the Philippines also claims, and that international law describes as being firmly within Philippine territorial waters. USS Benfold is here because she is supposed to be here. The United States Navy has been conducting freedom of navigation operations in these waters for decades, on the legal basis that navigational rights do not disappear simply because someone has printed a very detailed map. Benfold has done this before. Her crew has done this before. The morning watch is routine in the specific way that South China Sea freedom of navigation mornings are routine, slightly elevated, professionally managed, and adequately caffeinated. The time is 7:42. The surface search radar is painting a busy picture, as it always does in these waters. A mix of commercial shipping, regional fishing traffic, and the occasional China Coast Guard cutter that has been shadowing USS Benfold since she cleared the Luzon Strait. The Aegis Combat System is conducting its sky search. The Electronic Warfare Suite is monitoring the electromagnetic environment, which is, as always in the South China Sea, occupied. In the Combat Information Center below decks, the morning watch team is maintaining the picture, logging contacts and updating the track files. The Tactical Action Officer is in his chair. His coffee is from a fresh pot. This is unusual. He notes it. Today may be a good day. At 7:44, the surface search radar operator reports a new cluster of contacts bearing 045, range approximately 16 nautical miles in closing. The contact report goes into the log. 7 surface tracks, small to medium displacement, speed approximately 6 to 8 knots, course converging on USS Benfold's current track. The Tactical Action Officer looks at the contact geometry. He looks at the chart. He looks at the contact's positions relative to the reef. He picks up his coffee. What are they broadcasting on AIS? The answer comes back within 30 seconds. 6 of the 7 contacts are broadcasting automatic identification system signals, identifying them as fishing vessels registered in Hainan Province. The 7th is broadcasting nothing at all. The Tactical Action Officer notes all of this. He adds a line to the current log entry. His expression is the expression of a man who has been to this particular rodeo before and knows exactly which animal is coming out of the gate. These are, by the definition printed on their AIS transponders, fishing boats. 7 fishing boats, out here in the South China Sea on a Tuesday morning, pursuing the peaceful commercial activity of fishing. They have fishing nets. At least 2 of them have fishing nets visibly rigged on their aft decks. They are fishing boats in the same way that a labrador retriever wearing a service vest in an airport is a certified medical assistance animal. Technically plausible, increasingly unconvincing the more carefully you look, and broadly understood by everyone present to be operating in a gray zone that exists precisely because maintaining the fiction is more useful than abandoning it. Here is what makes the next 45 minutes genuinely, not artificially, worth paying close attention to. USS Benfold is currently in the narrowest portion of her planned transit route. The reef to the east creates a navigational constraint that limits her maneuvering options to a corridor approximately 4 nautical miles wide. The 7 contacts bearing down from the northeast have the geometry to position themselves across that corridor within 20 minutes at their current course and speed. The China Coast Guard cutter that has been shadowing Benfold since the Luzon Strait a Type 055B, displacing over 10,000 tons, considerably larger than the destroyer it is shadowing, is sitting at 8 nautical miles to the northwest. The destroyer's bridge team plots the geometry. The navigator does the math. At current rates of convergence, in approximately 18 minutes, USS Benfold will have the reef to the east, the Coast Guard cutter to the northwest, and 7 fishing boats positioned across the most navigable portion of the corridor ahead. This is not an accident. The geometry is too precise for accident. Somebody plotted this on a chart, calculated the timing, and coordinated the movement of at least 8 separate vessels to produce this picture. That somebody is not fishing. This is the vulnerability window, and it is worth understanding exactly what it is and is not. It is not a weapons threat. Nothing in this picture is pointed at Benfold with an intent to engage. The China Coast Guard cutter is armed, but its weapons are not the point of this exercise. The point is the positioning, the corridor, the implicit message that proceeding on the current course will require navigating through a coordinated Chinese presence that will be photographed, broadcast, and described by Chinese state media as evidence that USS Benfold altered course in response to Chinese maritime authority. The threat is not kinetic. It is diplomatic and informational, and it requires a response that is equally precise, equally professional, and considerably less easily photographed. The officer of the deck receives the navigator's assessment. She considers the geometry. She picks up the internal comms. Tayo, bridge. I have a corridor closure developing. 19 minutes coordinated maritime militia and CCG positioning. The tactical action officer acknowledges. He has already seen the geometry. He is already composing the situation report to 7th Fleet. He finishes his coffee. It is still fresh. He notes this. The morning continues to be, on balance, acceptable. Now let us talk about what these fishing boats are, because the answer is one of the more instructive aspects of Chinese maritime strategy of the past 2 decades, and because understanding it makes the next 40 minutes considerably more interesting. The People's Republic of China operates what it describes as a fishing fleet of approximately 600,000 registered vessels. This is, by a significant margin, the largest fishing fleet in the world. A portion of this fleet, estimates vary, but the numbers used by the Office of Naval Intelligence run into the thousands of vessels at any given time, operates under what analysts describe as the Maritime militia structure. Fishing vessels, crewed by fishermen, who are also members of a reserve paramilitary organization, coordinated through communications equipment that is considerably more sophisticated than the navigation of fish schools requires, operating in areas and formations that correlate with Chinese strategic interests in a way that commercial fishing economics cannot explain. The vessels are real fishing boats. The fishing equipment is real fishing equipment. The fishermen are real fishermen who also do other things when requested by the organizations that pay their supplemental income. The genius of the arrangement, from Beijing's perspective, is that it is simultaneously true and not true. The boats are fishing boats. The operation is not fishing. The 7 vessels, now converging on USS Benfold, are crewed by people who have caught actual fish in this sea. They are also responding to a coordination signal sent through a communication system that the SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite aboard Benfold identified at 7:49, logged on a frequency band associated with People's Liberation Army Navy communications architecture, and began recording with the patient thoroughness of a system that was built for exactly this kind of work. The signal is encrypted. The encryption is competent. The content is not readable. But the frequency, the transmission timing, the signal architecture, the burst pattern, all of these are recordable, and all of these are being recorded, and all of these will eventually tell analysts things about how the maritime militia's command and control structure operates that are worth considerably more than the inconvenience of a Tuesday morning corridor closure in the South China Sea. The intelligence warfare officer below decks is having what he will later describe, in terms that are professionally restrained but personally enthusiastic, as a productive morning. The 7 fishing boats are broadcasting on multiple frequencies. The AIS signals are recorded. Timing, position, vessel identity, registration details. The coordination frequency is logged. The China Coast Guard cutter is emitting its navigation and fire control radars on known frequencies, all of which are entered in the threat library, and some of whose emission characteristics have slightly changed since the last encounter, which is itself a data point. The SLQ-32 is building a picture of the electromagnetic architecture of a coordinated maritime militia operation in real time, from inside the operation, at close range. This is the kind of collection opportunity that months of standoff signals intelligence work produces at a fraction of this quality. The intelligence warfare officer is composing a collection report that will ultimately run to 31 pages and will be of specific interest to the Office of Naval Intelligence, Pacific Command, and the intelligence services of at least 3 allied nations that have their own problems with Chinese maritime militia operations in adjacent waters. He is not thinking about the corridor closure. The corridor closure is someone else's problem. His problem is making sure he captures everything before the geometry resolves and the contacts disperse. They're coordinating on a plan frequency, he reports to the tactical action officer, with the tone of a man confirming something he already knew but is now pleased to have documented precisely. Burst pattern is consistent with centralized command and control, not peer-to-peer vessel communication. Someone ashore is running this. He pauses. Also, 2 of the vessels are broadcasting a secondary AIS signal under different vessel names than their primary registration. The registration numbers don't match the hull markings visible on the bridge cameras. The tactical action officer notes this for the after-action report. It will be useful. Aboard one of the 7 fishing vessels, the crew is doing what fishing boat crews do, moving around the deck, checking equipment, drinking tea, performing the visual theater of fishing-related activity that is part of the operational protocol for this kind of mission. They are not nervous. They have done this before. They know that the American destroyer will not fire on fishing boats. This is, in fact, the central load-bearing premise of the entire operation. The destroyer will maneuver. The state media footage will show the fleet of fishing vessels holding position while the American warship alters course. The narrative writes itself, and it has been written before, and it will be written again. One crew member on the nearest vessel looks at USS Benfold through binoculars. The destroyer is close enough to see clearly. He can see sailors on the bridge wing. He cannot tell that one of the sailors on the bridge wing is looking back at him through a spotting scope, noting the hull markings, the deck equipment configuration, and the fact that the fishing nets on this particular vessel appear to have been rigged in a hurry and are not actually deployed in the water, which is an unusual approach to fishing. On the bridge wing of USS Benfold, a quartermaster is running a camera, logging visual documentation of every contact's hull number, deck configuration, and antenna array. This documentation will accompany the intelligence product. It is, by any standard, thorough. The quartermaster has been doing this for 40 minutes. He has coffee. His coffee is warm. He considers this a reasonable outcome for a Tuesday morning. At 8:07, the officer of the deck makes her move. USS Benfold does not alter course to the west, which would take her through the narrowest part of the corridor under the shadow of the Coast Guard cutter and produce the photographic narrative that the operation was designed to generate. She alters course to the south by 12 degrees and increases speed to 22 knots, increasing to 24 knots 2 minutes later. This maneuver is not an evasion. It is a rerouting that keeps USS Benfold within its freedom of navigation track, clears the coordinated corridor closure by approximately 3 nautical miles. And this is the part that will not appear in any Chinese state media reporting. Makes the geometry of the Coast Guard cutter's shadow position significantly less useful, because the cutter was positioned for a corridor that Benfold is no longer transiting. The fishing boats cannot match 24 knots. No fishing boat can. The closest vessel, running at its maximum sustainable speed of approximately 10 knots, watches the gap between itself and the destroyer increase at a rate that makes repositioning to re-establish the corridor closure geometrically impossible in the remaining time. The China Coast Guard cutter increases speed and begins repositioning, but the 10,000-ton cutter's transit time to a new shadow position is measured in the kind of minutes that are no longer useful. The operation had a specific geometry. The geometry required specific timing. USS Benfold has declined to participate in the timing. The tactical action officer watches the contacts separate from Benfold's track on the tactical display. The corridor closure has resolved. The officer of the deck reports. Continuing on adjusted track. ETA to transit completion, 46 minutes. The tactical action officer acknowledges. He adds a note to the log. He accepts a fresh cup of coffee from the watch supervisor, who has been managing the pot, with the kind of attentiveness that the operational environment deserves. The coffee is excellent. The morning, on balance, has been productive. Here is what the operation cost the United States Navy. A 12-degree course correction, a speed increase to 24 knots for approximately 30 minutes, and the fuel expenditure associated with the higher power setting. The specific fuel cost is not classified, but is also not particularly relevant because the Arleigh Burke-class was designed to go fast when circumstances require it, and to do so without making a significant decision about it. The officer of the deck made this decision in approximately the same amount of time she would spend deciding which lane to use on a highway. The maneuver was routine. The log entry for it is 3 lines. Here is what the operation cost the United States Navy's intelligence community: nothing. The SLQ-32 collection ran for 42 minutes. The intelligence product is 31 pages. The plan coordination frequency is now documented with a precision that previous collection had only approximated. The dual AIS registration on 2 vessels, one of the more specific pieces of evidence that a vessel is operating outside its stated commercial function, has been documented, with visual confirmation, photographic evidence, and electronic corroboration. The 31-page product will be in the relevant inboxes before USS Benfold completes her transit. It will find its way through liaison channels to the maritime surveillance organizations of the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, all of whom operate in the same waters against the same tactics, and will find specific operational value in the signal architecture documentation. The maritime militia did not know it was spending Tuesday morning providing a high-quality collection opportunity. The coordination signal transmitters did not know they were being logged. The vessel with the mismatched AIS registrations did not know its hull numbers had been photographed, cross-referenced, and entered into a database that will follow that vessel through every future encounter. The operation was, from Beijing's planning perspective, a carefully coordinated show of Chinese maritime presence in waters Beijing claims. From the USS Benfold's watch team's perspective, it was a Tuesday morning that required a course change and produced an excellent intelligence product. Now let us talk about what Chinese state media reported. The first account appeared within 4 hours of the encounter, which is a production timeline that suggests the footage was being prepared before the operation concluded. The report described a Chinese maritime operation in the South China Sea, in which fishing vessels exercised their legitimate right to operate in Chinese territorial waters, while a United States Navy vessel conducted what the report described as a provocative intrusion into Chinese sovereign maritime space. The footage accompanying the report showed the fishing vessels in frame with what appeared to be a warship at distance. The warship was, indisputably, USS Benfold. The fishing vessels were, indisputably, present. The framing of both facts produced a third fact that was not quite either of the first two. The second account, published by a state-affiliated outlet with a larger international reach, reported that the American destroyer had been compelled to alter course in response to the presence of Chinese vessels asserting sovereignty over Chinese waters. This is technically accurate in the sense that USS Benfold did alter course. It omits the context that the course alteration was a navigational choice made at 24 knots that resolved the corridor closure on Benfold's preferred terms and left the Coast Guard cutter repositioning in her wake. The account includes a, quote, from an unnamed military source, confirming that Chinese maritime forces had successfully demonstrated effective presence. This is also, in its way, accurate. They were present. They were effectively outmaneuvered by a destroyer, doing 24 knots. These two things happened simultaneously. The third account, the one that circulated most widely on international platforms, described the incident as evidence of China's growing capability to challenge U.S. naval freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. This is the account that carries the most strategic weight because it is aimed at an audience that does not need to understand the operational details. It needs to receive the impression that the correlation of forces in the South China Sea is shifting. The operational details do not support this impression. The impression is nevertheless useful for purposes that have nothing to do with the operational details. What none of the accounts mentioned, the 31 pages, the dual AIS registration documentation, the plan coordination frequency, now logged with a precision that will inform electronic countermeasures development across the Pacific Fleet. The fact that the China Coast Guard cutter, despite its 10,000-ton displacement, was left repositioning after a course change it did not anticipate. The fact that USS Benfold completed her freedom of navigation transit on schedule, in international waters, in a place she is legally entitled to be, and then proceeded to her next tasking without incident. On the bridge wing of USS Benfold, the quartermaster has finished his camera work and is reviewing the footage. The hull numbers are clear. The deck configurations are clear. The non-deployed fishing nets on the nearest vessel are very clear. He catalogs the files, transfers them to the intelligence product package, and accepts his own coffee. The coffee is, at this point in the morning, still acceptable. In the Combat Information Center, the Tactical Action Officer writes his final log entry for the engagement period. It is, like all good log entries, clinical and precise. Coordinated maritime militia positioning, resolved by course alteration. China Coast Guard cutter maintained shadow position until course change. No hostile action. No damage. Freedom of navigation transit completed. Intelligence collection, significant. He underlines the last entry. Then he thinks about it for a moment and removes the underline because official logs do not use underlines for emphasis, and the intelligence officer can make his own case for the significance of the product. The log is the log. The facts are the facts. USS Benfold is already 3 nautical miles further south on her amended track, making 20 knots in international waters on a Tuesday morning in the South China Sea. The 9-dash line is still on all the new Chinese maps. The International Tribunal's 2016 ruling is still the law. USS Benfold will be back next month. The SLQ-32 will be listening. The camera on the bridge wing will be running. The coffee, the Tactical Action Officer has decided, will be from a fresh pot, regardless of what the morning brings. He was right about that much anyway. Today was a good day. Bye for now.